I'd like to welcome everyone to the first of our UW Extension Sheep Task Force mini-series on predation management. Tonight, we will hear from the Laramie Research and Extension Center, otherwise known as LREC, on how they integrated BLM burros or donkeys into their research flock to reduce predation risk. My name is Dylan Laverell, and I work here at the University of Wyoming Extension Sheep Program. And it's my honor to introduce three individuals who will be speaking to you tonight. And those are Dr. Derek Scasta, Director of LREC, Kalli, LREC Sheep Unit Manager, and Elias Hutchinson, Equine and Arena Manager for LREC. Just as a reminder, tonight's webinar will be recorded and put on the University of Wyoming Extension YouTube channel for future viewing. And please feel free to type in any questions that you might have during our discussion, and we will answer them either during or after the presentation today. Just know that you can do that by clicking in the Q&A box, which should be on your bottom taskbar. And with that, thank you guys for spending some time with us this evening, and we look forward to our conversation. Derek, the floor is yours.
All right, can you see our screen? Yep, great. Well, as Dylan mentioned, my name is Derek, and we're going to tell you about a project that's been really a result of the team you see here in front of you here at the University of Wyoming LREC Research and Extension Center. And we're going to try to tell some stories and just share the experiences as we've tried to integrate donkeys or burros, if you will, into our sheep program. So just a little bit about our team. You can see at the top there, the three of us. One other team member who's not here is our extension sheep specialist, Dr. Whit Stewart. Probably the most important members of the team that we're going to talk about today are the four donkeys that have become part of our program. So you can see we've got four female donkeys: Rose, Sophia, Blanche, and Dorothy. And some of what we're going to tell you about tonight has been published in a paper along with some others who helped with that. And that's in the Sheep and Goat Research Journal. And that's freely available. We can help you get to that if you'd like. So I'm going to kick it to Kalli just to tell you a little bit about our sheep unit.
Sure. So we run 450 Ramble AUs. 100 of those are replacement ewe lambs. So we'll be lambing out 350. We use 7 breeding sires to cover those ewes. We have meadows as well as pasture land. We run on quite close to 6,000 acres down here between meadows and meadows and pastures. We host the annual ram test through the Wyoming Wool Growers every year from August to April. And then we've started a lamb a year program. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're at year 3 or 4 on that. Doing producers donate lambs to the program. We cover all the data on them: feed efficiency data, growth data, carcass data, and then the proceeds go back to the sheep program from that program.
And the LREC Center, generally supports research, and that has included some other types of sheep too. We just shipped out some Katahdin lambs that were part of a research project with another faculty, which there's some stories about how the donkeys worked in those sheep. So just a couple of pictures kind of give you a sense of the variation in the meadows and the situations the sheep and the donkeys are in. You can see this is right up next to the edge of town with some big cottonwood trees where we're watering some sheep here. You can see town here in the background. So we're just on the west side of Laramie, which is also just along the foothills of the Laramie Range to the east, and then the Snowy Range to the west. And here, these sheep are in one of our dormant irrigated hay meadows, which is where we winter a lot of sheep. And again, the situation being close to town is also an avenue for predators. You can see here, there's the potential for stray dogs. This is one of our really large, kind of extensive pastures. It's over 700 acres. It has a lot of shrubs and brush and different watering points in it. So some of the situations are pretty extensive, I would say. And I'll back up. I want to point out here, you can see these cottonwoods, that we also have the Laramie River that runs along the south side of the facilities and property. And so that's another avenue for predators, in particular coyote pressure along that river corridor. So
That's important to note because technically we have 3 safe havens around us. So we have town, the city limits, we have the airport to the north of us, and then we have what's called the city monolith to the west of us, which is city owned, and you cannot hunt on that. So we can't even shoot coyotes off of that piece of ground. So we are basically a highway from the river to the north for highways to trail through here. So we get a lot of pressure every year because of those safe havens.
yeah, so there's restrictions and restraints on what we can do or can't do for sure. So I'm going to ask Elias and Kalli to kind of tell you about how this idea came about, because really this was their baby. And I came in late to the game and was excited about it, but this was certainly their idea. So how'd this idea come about?
So there's a slide that's coming up that's going to show you our predation for the last 4 years, and that's a fiscal year. So our fiscal year starts in July. And you'll see that we cut predation in half by getting these donkeys. And the reason that came about was because we were getting so many deaths from coyotes. We generally just have coyotes. We haven't had any other predator bother us besides coyotes. We ended up with a couple Mustangs that were originally purchased through a different program. And somehow LREC just inherited these Mustangs. And we didn't know what to do with them. They were tame, but not tame all at the same time. So it wasn't like we could do a whole lot with them. So Elias, racking his head on what to do with them, decided, well, let's go put them out with the sheep and just see what happens. And what we saw was those Mustangs would always stay between the sheep and our pressure zones. So between the sheep and the river was the biggest pressure zone we had. So it kind of gave us the idea that maybe equine wouldn't be so bad as predators. And then from there, Elias kind of took it and ran with it. And he can tell you what he did.
Yeah, so because we noticed a little bit of that, I think, that opened our mind to trying something else, because we have had guardian animals out here before, and those would be Pyrenees dogs and different challenges there. A good dog for us has to be quiet and kind to handle the amount of people and pressure and vehicles, but you can imagine a dog like that's not going to do their job well. So we just kind of were at a kind of standstill there and noticed this, and those Mustangs, to be fair, did not bond with the sheep. It wasn't like this magical paradise out there, but we just noticed that, like, because they were out there, what typically would be happening wasn't happening. So we thought of the Burros. My dad used to work for the BLM, and so he and I kind of talked about it. Anyway, so we went down the chain to start to get Burros, and just thought, they're not that expensive. Let's try it, see what happens.
So when I heard about their idea, my grandfather always had 2 donkeys with some cows. And then my dad back in Texas has had a donkey with some hair sheep with some successes and some failures. He ended up getting rid of that donkey. So I was excited to learn more along with Kalli and Elias. And so I think there was a lot of enthusiasm to see if it would work or not.
And to be fair, neither one of us really knew what we were doing with guardian animals as far as training them or anything like that. Kat Urbakite really became a good source for us to just ask questions, and she guided us from the get-go and taught us how to do it, or told us how to do it. She didn't teach us, but taught us or told us, and we went from there.
So I just want to kind of review some of the advantages and then disadvantages of donkeys that I think probably factored into some of the decision to give them a try, but then some things we were, thinking about. So the purchase price is generally pretty low, and these donkeys came from the BLM, so that the adoption fee is pretty nominal. Compared to dogs, there's often less upkeep for a number of reasons, in terms of like veterinary and healthcare. And donkeys are really suitable to the existing fencing and feed resources. So they're going to respect those fences that contain sheep, unlike a dog, which might slip under and roam much bigger than a pasture. And they're eating the same, forage as those sheep. So not that accounting for additional feed. They can have a long working life. They can be only needing minimal supervision. And what has been noted is they really dislike canines. They really dislike dogs and coyotes. So certainly there's some advantages there.
Yeah, with the exception like my herd dogs, they've figured out that those herd dogs belong to me. And they respect me. Therefore, they respect my herd dogs when we do go out to herd. They do not respect our guardian dog because I'm rarely out there with the guardian dog. So that's just a foreign canine to them, basically. But I have gotten them used to the herd dogs to where they know when those dogs go out, they'll still try to go after them, but it's half-hearted. So
So what was that like initially? Like the first gathering, you've got herding dogs, you've got a donkey.
well, it was a learning process for all of us involved, that's for sure.
Yep.
So the first time we went out, the donkey actually tried to separate the sheep and get them away from me. So she busted them up into two different groups. So then the dogs had to work two groups. And eventually she did come after the dogs and she chased the dogs and the dogs came back to me, obviously, as their home base. And once I put my hands up and stood my ground to her, she respected me and then figured out those dogs belonged to me. And she let us gather those two groups back together and then continued with the flock to the corral that we were gathering to. So they have a pretty quick learning pace. But it was a little hairy at the beginning.
One thing to note too with canines, it's not like they're wise enough to distinguish. They understand the situation, and so a couple of those pasture meadows, people walk dogs on one side or the other, and for the longest time, you'd hear them start to bray because they saw that. They'd go investigate and then realize that's pretty far off. There's a human with it. But it took a while for them to stop alerting. Most like I'd know a dog was coming because I'd hear it. Yep.
Yeah. So certainly some challenges. So the advantage of being averse to dogs is an advantage, but a challenge too, as we've talked about. It's also noted sometimes donkeys can get kind of fat, so managing their body condition and then managing their feet. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. And then just some knowledge and experience handling those horses or those donkeys, which we'll talk about some more. So, anybody thinking about getting a donkey needs to think about some of the challenges, and we'll talk through some of the ways we've dealt with some of those challenges. I just want to show you this graph. So this is some USDA data. You can just look at panel A. This is all sheep operations, just to show you the relative popularity of donkeys compared to dogs. So this goes back to 2004. These circles are dogs. So currently it's about a third of sheep operators have guard dogs. The dark triangles are donkeys and the white dots are llamas. You can see donkeys have even lagged behind llamas at times. So they've generally been the least used guard animal for sheep, but maybe there's a slight increase. And certainly this is a non-lethal strategy for predator management. It's a deterrent, if you will. So one of the things we were really interested in when we first got these donkeys was how will they integrate into the flocks? And there wasn't much information in the research literature. We kind of realized we had a good demonstration project to ask some questions. So I'm going to walk you through that and show you what we found. So these 4 donkeys came out of California from the BLM, as Elias mentioned. They're all female. 3 of them were yearlings and 1 was a 4-year-old at the time. And we put these into separate flocks and pastures. And then we monitored them daily for the next 43 days to see were they staying with those sheep. And we estimated distances with a range finder and using Google Earth and triangulating off of known locations and pastures. And then we just started to qualitatively also indicate if they were in, near, or just away from those sheep. So I just want to walk you through the 4 scenarios, and you guys certainly chime in because y'all are very familiar with these individuals, and that's important. These aren't individuals. They have different personalities. So the first donkey immediately integrated into the flock, pretty much within 24 hours. So this donkey got put in a 17-acre pasture with 102 mature ewes. So that's the highest sheep density of all of the sheep pasture combinations. Importantly, there were no other equine neighbors, with one exception. There was another donkey colleague, if you will, to the north across the road. And on average, this donkey was never more than 7 meters away from any individual sheep. So this donkey was immediately integrated into the sheep. Which donkey is that?
That's
It's
right.
Rose.
That's Rose, okay? Now, directly to the north of Rose was a donkey that we put in a 55-acre pasture with 105 yearling ewes. So sheep density was much less than the first donkey. Now, there were no other equine neighbors except for the donkey to the south across the road. This donkey was very much socially tied to that other donkey. So she would sit at the fence on the south side of that pasture and look across the road at this other donkey. And it took about 2 weeks for that cycle to break. And the reason it did is we ended up moving the donkey to the south. I think that's correct. So that was really the only intervention there was.
So to note about that one's Sophia, and she was the youngest donkey that came in. By-
Smallest, youngest, obviously
Yeah.
the least dominant of all.
Uh, So I think she just didn't know what was going on. She's been probably our best donkey
Yep.
since then. After she finally bonded, she's been exceptional.
Mhm.
Probably even better than Rose in
Yeah.
some stances.
But best utilitarian donkey.
Yeah.
The next donkey is this one on the bottom right. Which donkey is this?
That is
Blanche.
Blanche. So she got put into a 102-acre pasture with 114 ewes. And she had a lot of equine neighbors. So she had 16 horses to the northeast and 15 horses to the south. So two boundary fences with a lot of horses. And she wanted to socialize with those horses. She was definitely drawn to them. So Elias had to spend a lot of time intervening with her, and that including some hobbling, pinning with the sheep.
Mhm.
And after about a week, she really kind of figured out what was expected of her.
Yeah.
Okay. Which donkey is this? What's her name?
Dorothy.
Dorothy.
The oldest one.
So this was the oldest donkey, and we put this donkey in arguably the most complex situation. So this was our largest pasture. We call this the monolith, over 700 acres. Has a lot of brush on it, more topography. It borders the river. So there's some benches and some willows and stuff with only 50 ewes. So this created the lowest sheep density situation. There's also multiple cross fences where gates were open, but there was a fence, multiple water points. There was a small group of cows also in there, and then equine neighbors to the east, which she was quite interested in. And some of our dogs can easily walk over to that pasture. So after 25 days, this donkey had not integrated into the flock at all. Part of the reason was those sheep would go to the far west end and you couldn't even visually see them from where the donkey was. So we ended up putting her in a more ideal situation where we put her in an 18-acre meadow with 31 sheep, I think it's 30 ewes and a ram, so a breeding group. And within 5 days, she was inside that group of sheep. She was integrated. So, so in the literature, there wasn't a whole lot of information on how long it takes at a operational level to integrate donkeys into sheep. And here we had 4, and you can see this top graph is the distances. So this donkey 7107 at times was more than 1,000 meters away from the flock. She couldn't see him. But within about 5 weeks, about 35 days, all of those donkeys were within the flocks of sheep. So importantly, it's possible just with some adjustments, some teamwork, and we're going to talk through a little bit more of that as we go. This is that qualitative data. The black parts of the bars would just be percentage of time in the flock. And you can see some of these 90% of the time or more was in the flock. Others was less than 30% for that 43-day period. Now, some people might think this is personality and individual variation. I'm going to argue it's setting. It's the size of the pasture, the complexity. So kind of understanding, are they set up for success, I think is important. Okay, so one of the big challenges is equine neighbors. Elias, you want to say anything about that?
I mean, they're, as you can assume, horses are a creature of a herd, so they're going to want to be in some type of security because they're equine. They're going to naturally gravitate to equine. So in a situation like this, where we're trying to make that herd of sheep their herd, they certainly are not going to take the bait on that. And in an equal form, those sheep are not going to, you know, accept them as another sheep. And so when you have this, you know, magnetic force both ways, this donkey in particular really struggled to be in that spot.
You can see in the background some of the rough stock bucking horses here. And it also was a bottleneck because this is where they watered. So they had to come, she had to come near these horse neighbors. And then as the sheep drifted back out, I think she just hung out with other horses. So certainly that's something to be aware of. So one of the next challenges is taking care of these donkeys, feet, medicine, etc. And that's really where Elias's just kind of horse skills come into play.
Sure. Yeah, so I think when it comes to like a regular little schedule of hoof care, depending on their nutrition, what kind of footing they're on, obviously that's going to change that. And then obviously too, you don't want to have to go out and just gather the donkey and just do its feet. So we tried to use a pretty practical management style where anytime the sheep are coming in for something, swapping rams, switching pastures, any bottleneck situation, we would use that time to go ahead and trim their feet. So you can see in these pictures on the right side, that is trimming feet. What we do is quietly and I guess with the most art possible, we try to rope those donkeys only by their feet. They're strong enough that they don't always handle a rope around their neck well. So once we get them down, we tie them down quiet and we just take our time. It looks like this donkey stretched out pretty far, but it's not. And I just go around and trim not only their hoof wall, but their sole and their frog. And then usually if we can too, you can see in the picture on the left, this is one of my students actually warming that donkey. So in a typical management system, I would assume no less than 2 times a year, you would need to do this procedure. These donkeys, every 8 to 12 weeks, they're getting that, sometimes more just because they're in. So I don't think that's necessarily the highest part of a list to say, let's not do donkeys because of having to do this. When the BLM does this, they use a stanchion. And so if you can create a stanchion and if you can get them to go through an alleyway, or honestly, in a lot of cases, I think if you could get them in a horse trailer, you could restrain them in such a way that you could still do that. And I know for a fact, all the donkeys, they do not need to be roped to be warmed. This one was getting its feet done. So a lot of them, they're getting to a point where you can kind of pinch them in a corner and they'll let that happen and they'll let you handle their mouth enough to put warmer in. So that's those 2 pictures there.
Yeah, with that said, these donkeys have never been aggressive towards humans.
No.
I mean, from day one, they never tried to kick at us, bite at us, anything like that. The few times that I know of that somebody has gotten bitten, it's usually when we're doing this, when we're trying to tie them down, and that's just their instinct. They're trying to get away. So I don't really blame them for that. So yeah, they're pretty easy for us to manage, and they like their pets and their cuddles and their cake and all that stuff. So.
Extremely social.
Yeah.
And certainly any care on the feet or administering medicine, making sure personnel are safe and
Yes,
is important.
There's
too.
a protocol that has gone through to ensure safety of everyone.
So whether it's roped, and as Elias said, not roping around the neck out of concern for their safety, but also safety for him and his employees. So if you're using a corral and chute or stanchion, like having care, I mean, that's really important. But to Kalli's point, yeah, they haven't shown a tendency to kick the way horses might.
Yeah, nothing like that.
So one of the next challenges can come with herding. We'll let Kalli make some comments. She's had some experiences.
So I think, and I hope Elias agrees, they're easy for us to stress out. And I think they react to the stress poorly is when we have our challenges. So like when we first go out to herd, whether I'm using the dogs or whether we're using four-wheelers or horses, those donkeys will do everything they can to try to just create chaos from the very get-go, but it usually only lasts a couple minutes and then they kind of figure out, well, they're not going to let me get away with it.
Yeah, they definitely don't just turn tail and leave.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you have to have that problem. But
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead.
So I mean, they will blow up the flock, split them into groups. They get, like I said, they get stressed out. So we'll have them bite on some of the ewes a little bit. They've never drawn blood. They've never made wounds. But they'll bite enough that they pull out some wool every now and then or something like that. They absolutely do not like when the sheep are around their legs. And that's when the kicking comes in. If any of the ewes get too close to their back leg or something, they just don't like it. So they'll kick at that ewe. The sheep are pretty smart. They try to maintain their distance. But eventually once that donkey figures out she's not going to get away with being naughty, they'll either get right in the middle of the flock and just stay with them, or two of the donkeys for sure are basically our lead sheep. So they'll get out in front of the herd and they'll start taking the herd wherever we need to go. So it works out. Like I said, there's just a couple minutes from the very get-go where it's a little bit chaotic, but you kind of let them figure it out and be patient with them, and they go right where you want them to go. So,
And we may gather sheep up more frequently than
for sure,
the average producer, just because we're doing research and demonstration work. So we probably do a lot of handling, which is probably good because there is some training and learning that happens for them.
When we first got them in, we were integrating multiple times to get them to do it. I would go around and just gather them and send them right back out. And there's a lot to be said. You kind of have to herd the donkey, get that donkey going, and then get the sheep. But there's this magnet pull. If the donkey gets too far, then it runs back. So it's an art, and you have to be patient. But once you figure it out, it's just right.
Elias, let me ask you one question.
Yeah.
Early on, how often were you horseback, kind of herding the donkey to the sheep?
Really, there was only two groups that did that. With the long field group, which I guess that would have been the donkey
with the horses.
With the horses that had a lot of trouble.
And
my thought there was just to make sure she knew same water. We all go to water together. We all water and then we leave. And then the other one who we had to do major intervention with, the oldest one, same deal. Just because we knew we were going to have to put hobbles on or do something, and I needed her to move with the sheep. So It wasn't, I'd say less than 3 or 4 times per group, and it was, I tried to spread it out a little bit. Just so every time they saw someone horseback, whatever, it's not full on run them down type situation.
So another challenge is not only herding and moving those sheep, but putting them in pens for different projects or working. You can see this is inside one of our facilities here. There's different sizes of pens and different situations they end up in, depending on what we're doing.
The biggest thing I've noticed is when we bring them in and we have them corralled or we have them in tight barns like this, as long as they're just sitting and we're not hooping and hollering, we're not making them stressed out or anything like that, they're fine with being in a corral or in a barn. They'll just stand there with the sheep. Every once in a while, she's trying to come up to me to get a pet because I'm sitting there paying attention to her. But the biggest challenge that we've had with bringing them into the corrals is the alleyways. They don't like the stress of the alleyways. We've had some problems with them running the sheep up and down the alleyway. We've had them get a ewe down and try to paw at her and stuff. And like I said, I don't think they're doing it maliciously. I think it's just their reaction to the stress of the situation. So usually in the alleyways, we try to get them sorted off right away, work the sheep, do whatever we need to. And then when we trail back out, put them back with the sheep and they go. The other interesting part is they don't like being away from their sheep. So when we separate them out in the alley, leave them in the alley and close the barns on close the doors on the barns to work the sheep, they'll sit out there and bray and bray and bray and bray until you finally put sheep back with them and then they're content. So.
And I think that's important to consider that usually they're in, pretty spacious areas. And sometimes there's these bottlenecks, water, those alleyways. shearing barn, things like that. So, care there and just watching them is important. And then sometimes, we need to bring them in and we've got to create some movement, use some other tools. So this was the donkey that was in that really big pasture. The sheep had wandered to the far west end. And so we were going to change up her situation. And it took some movement. Elias, want to say anything about it?
So this situation here, we went out horseback a few times just to see if we could, bump her back into the sheep or, just gather things together. And she'd see that. And unlike I said, now when you get in there, they kind of stay close to sheep. She would turn and kind of run. And where this is and different situations, I was mostly concerned about her learning how to hop fences. And that's a whole thing, especially when they learn that. So what I did the day before this is I went out and got behind her and just tried to do the same thing and be quiet and a horseman about it. Didn't work. And so this day, especially with equine, they're very, very smart and they can work angles. Like if they see that they can shoot a gap, they're going to do it. They're fast, they're quick, they can turn. So there was 3 of us out there on 4-wheelers and we kind of had to work as a team. And as soon as we could get her moving in a direction, it wasn't, back off, take the pressure off, let her take her time to find that gate. It was the Wild West. I mean, it might as well have been Australia. So in this situation, once we got her on the run, we got her into kind of a long, an alleyway basically, and it was full bore the whole time. So I don't think the situation is going to happen a lot, but if you do get into that, there's ways or people to ask to make sure that you're safe and not running them through fences or just spending 4 hours getting run down out there. So
and it's important to note this was very early in this donkey's time here, and she had not integrated into sheep yet. And what we don't know about these BLM donkeys is what experiences they've had. Obviously, she was gathered off the range, probably in the Mojave Desert or somewhere. We don't know.
Yeah.
She very well could have been chased by a helicopter. We don't know if she was bait trapped or what. And her flight zone was the biggest.
amazing.
The pressure point for her was like 50 yards, and she was moving off of that pressure. And it was the biggest, which is surprising, although maybe not. Who knows? A mountain lion might have jumped on her back, or she might have been shot at by people. We don't know.
Yeah.
So kind of thinking about what their experiences are but one of the things we've talked about is moving horses and donkeys is different sometimes, because once that movement starts, you got to go with it. Just because they're running is not necessarily a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Keep that movement going as long as it's going where you want to go.
She still is our most standoffish donkey. She's integrated, she's bonded, she wants to stay with her sheep now. But as far as humans go,
Pets and
she will keep her distance away from us. She's much better now for sure. We can herd her, we can do anything with her now, but she still won't come in for pets. She doesn't want to be touched. She just is the standoffish.
One thing I don't know if this is even pertinent or not, but when they unloaded them, we didn't know how, my mind thought, antelope.
Wild.
We're just gone.
Yeah, bouncing off the
that. So we put them inside a barn with, rough stock size fences to prevent that. And that was for one night. And then we put them out. And so she went out. There wasn't an intermediate between that and then this situation for us. Basically, was no integration. I think she thought she was wild again.
Yeah.
And that's why I think all this got to the situation it got to. And that's why we intervened in the way that we did. That's certainly not something I don't think you'd pull the trigger right away to do.
And 5 days later after this picture, she's fully integrated into a flock of sheep. Yeah. So this could have been a donkey that a producer might have given up on. Like, it's not working. We got big pastures. She's not staying with the donkeys. I'm a couple weeks in, I'm done. Right. And using a little bit of kind of horse knowledge, we changed her situation. Now she's made a pretty good guard donkey. So yeah, it's an important picture, I think, of the learning of the team.
Well, yeah, we definitely had to learn the hard way.
Yep.
So we found this out for sure. If you want to integrate, and I would say maybe this goes for all guardian animals. I'm sure people have more experience than we do, but anywhere you can get them tighter to let them do that bond for even just a week before you turn them out into some big fast pasture. Yeah, it's gonna help you out in the long run for sure.
And I think this team was willing to have just that iterative process. What's working, what's not, what should we try? And that's what I saw Kalli and Elias do, and setting them up for success. Of course, we wanted them to go to work as quickly as we could, too. So that's the other side of it. And so the other thing we mentioned was, there is a lot of horseback work that happens here. And that might help our sheep be receptive to a donkey because they see horses. So how frequently do you guys use horses?
It's just those big gathers. I mean, anytime, I would say over 50% of the gathers, there's a horse.
I was gonna
involved.
say, basically when Elias can help me gather,
Yeah.
he's on horseback.
Yeah.
And that's not every time, but yeah, he's kind of my main gatherer.
So some producers may have flocks that don't see horses.
Right.
And then some, may have a herder that's horseback all the time. So just thinking about, what are those sheep accustomed to as well?
And I will say too, so he's on the halflinger, so we have that team. He also feeds with that team in the winter for us.
Yes, that's
So they're also around those particular horses all winter when he's feeding for us out on pasture. So yeah, we probably have
Our sheep
more
are pretty
equine.
graceful.
Yeah.
And they're a part of the team too, right? You
Yeah.
got staff, you got the donkey, you've got our working horses, but those sheep are learning too. And
Yeah.
they're trying to figure out what are we doing here as well. So one of the other challenges is the other dogs that we have, as mentioned. Kalli's got some herding dogs, which are really important. This is our Pyrenees Lobo. You can see this picture here. There was a donkey in this pasture. There was the donkey that had not integrated. And guard dog's out for a visit, and one of the herding dogs, young dog at the time, was out, not where it should be.
Mhm.
Right. So
She's being
yeah. So, kind of deciding, am I committing to donkeys? Do I have other dogs around that we need? And the Pyrenees hangs around, the lambing barn, our feed pens and stuff, but still kind of wanders out. So
I will say Lobo in particular, I don't know if every guard dog is like this, but he is not an equine fan at all. He hates equine. That was a big challenge we had at the beginning. We did have a donkey hobbled up in a corral with a group of sheep trying to get her to bond. Lobo decided it was his duty to go out and try to accost that donkey while it was hobbled. So that kind of ended in chaos. Eventually got the guard dog to get away from the donkey. Tried to chase him off, I guess, basically. So nobody was hurt. The sheep weren't hurt. The donkey wasn't hurt. The guard dog wasn't hurt. But that definitely was a challenge, was the guard dog being in the pasture at the same time the donkey was, and them not being used to each other, that type of stuff. That guard dog in particular is our old man. So I think getting the donkeys was the last straw for him.
Yeah.
He does not go out to the pastures anymore. He's basically just our barn
Nice
guard
dog.
dog. So it worked out in our benefit again.
but right now he's close to a donkey because we got a donkey
Yep.
in the pen with
So
him.
they've learned to coexist together. He does still get riled up
He'll
and
bark
tries
at
to
you.
go bark at the fence at the donkey. But he won't cross into the corral fences to get at a donkey or anything like that. And he's never bit one. He just likes to accost them. So
And having him around, the barns is important. We have a lot of public traffic, and people may have their dog in the back of the truck that jumps out and that happens all the time. So it also just an important part of the operation, I think. So the big question is how effective have these donkeys been? And so Kalli's kind of compiled this, these predator losses that we've documented over the last 4 years. So you can see these are fiscal years 21, 22, we lost 20 sheep, 22, 23, 42. That's a total of 62 over those 2 years where we didn't have any donkeys. And then 23 and 24, we still have had some losses. So it hasn't completely eliminated, all deaths, but 12 head, and then this year 15, which is 27. So that comes out to an over 50% reduction in losses, but we've still had a lot of pressure from predators. Is that right?
yeah. So yeah, we even had the county trapper out this year, trapping and shooting for us, and he got a fairly significant amount of coyotes himself. And that's on top of the donkey being out there. Biggest note that we noticed this past summer is we went out for our morning check, and one of our flocks that was down by the river, so our river pasture, which is the closest to the river that we always get pressure on, we had the sheep separated into 3 different groups. So at some point during the night, they got busted up and separated, and that's not sheep characteristic at all. They always flock together. They always try to stay together. But for whatever reason, they got split up. And I would say that was a group of 150, I think, that we had on that river pasture this summer. And being split up into 3 groups like that, I would imagine that a pack had to be going after them. With that said, any guardian animal, not just donkeys, I would say, they can't always, dogs being the exception probably, can't always protect against it when it's that bad. So that donkey stayed with one group for sure, but she couldn't stay with all 3 groups. And we did end up with a kill that night. But like I said, there problems with them being by themselves, but also we don't want to put them together because we don't want them to pack up with each other. We want them to stay with the sheep. So we're consistently keeping these 4 donkeys separate from each other. With that said, though, we did have donkeys this fall that were fence line apart. And they would go to the fence line, say hi to each other, love on each other. But as soon as those flocks of sheep started to go to water or to leave that area, those donkeys would turn around and go straight back with their sheep. They would leave the other donkey on the fence line. So that was good to see that it that it was working. So.
And I think that's one of the things kind of for the future we were really curious about. Once they were integrated, as we started to move groups and pastures and have those fence line neighbors with their cohort, and yeah, they knew one another were there, but then they would go back. Yeah. You can see in this picture is one of our breeding groups. You can see the ram. So we've also just had different, groups of animals where we have rams in there as well breeding ewes, and that's worked out okay too.
Yeah, and we constantly are changing sheep as far as which donkey has which set of sheep. I mean, they're constantly changing and getting sorted and stuff like that. Sophia is our yearling donkey, I should say. She's always with the ewe lambs and stuff, but that changes every year which ewe lamb she's with. She actually has her work cut out for her, because with getting a new group every year, those are lambs that haven't been with a donkey. They don't know.
Lambs.
Yeah, so she's having to train the lambs to stay with her every year. And she's done a phenomenal job at it.
She herds them around.
Yep.
Now one interesting case is we had some Katahdin sheep, some lambs on a research project, and those sheep did not stay in a single group. They break out into 5 or 10 subgroups, and the donkeys had a hard time. They could not keep up with them, even in smaller pastures. Do we have some death losses there?
Yes. So she did become aggressive. We caught her picking them up by their hide and throwing them. We caught her kicking at them, stuff like that. That wasn't good on her part, but I really think it was because she was trying to keep them gathered, and they would not gather. They would not stay together. So I think she was really struggling with that, because after that happened, we put her with our mature rams, and she has no problems being with those mature rams. So yeah, I think it's definitely the scenario with the sheep and the donkey. It has to work together. It's not just the donkey's fault. It's not just the sheep's fault. It has to be cohesive.
And I think our Rambouillets have a really strong flocking instinct, and that very much helps the donkey be successful. If you add goats or some other sheep that don't have that instinct, it's going to be very difficult, because I think those Katahdins were on a 17-acre meadow, and they were in every corner. Groups of 3 and 5. So may not be for every type of sheep. The next thing we're going to be really curious about is, will they work with lambs?
So this is Rose in that picture. In last lambing season, we kind of just needed somewhere to put Rose. We needed for her to go somewhere because we didn't have a pasture for her to go on or anything. So I thought, oh, what the heck? Let's just throw her in with the pairs. So that is probably a 1.5 to 2-week-old lamb. And it was sick, and I needed to doctor it. And she would not let me do it. She put herself in between me and the lamb every time, and she tried to keep herding it away from me. So she was very protective of it. Eventually, she got tired of me chasing her around, and she let me doctor the lamb. So this year, our next experiment is going to be Rose is in with our pregnants right now. We're going to see how she reacts to actual labor and fresh lambs on the ground, and see how that works. And hopefully it does. Rose is our best attitude, best character donkey.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why she's our test subject all the time. She's just got a sweet personality, really good disposition. So I think she'll be the donkey to try that on them. I would not try this with Blanche or Dorothy because they are not that way in their character. I wouldn't even put Blanche or Dorothy in with pairs. They would always have to be with something that didn't have lambs on them. Sophia probably being the other exception, but again, like I said, she's always with our replacements, and that's just her home, and that's where she stays. So
yeah, we're going to be really curious to watch this. There is a lot of recommendation in the literature to pull those donkeys when you're lambing. And for my dad, he had a donkey that was working good until lambing, and then she got really confused and killed both lambs and ewes. So this is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
This very well might be where that individual personality definitely plays. You know, not every donkey's a lamb donkey. So, you know, we're thinking about a lot of other, you know, opportunities to observe on these donkeys, and then keeping them healthy. I mean, it's important, and that's something we're committed to, having healthy guard animals. So with that, any other final comments from the experts? Okay. Well, pull up the chat there. We're happy to answer any questions. We'll turn it back over to you, Dylan.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for presenting and telling us your insights on using guard donkeys in a sheep herd. Looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is, has there been any attacks on the donkeys? I imagine, like, have you noticed any predation on the donkeys?
So how far into it was it? Had to have been the first month.
Dorothy, right?
Yeah.
That's who we're talking about. I don't know if it was the first month, but it was definitely that winter after we got him.
It was pretty soon in there, and what we noticed was just what kind of looked like a canine bite on her front leg. We can't definitively say that wasn't a domestic dog, but it looked that way. It wasn't too deep, wasn't too bad, but that is the only mark that I have seen.
Who had the scratches on their hind?
That was from Bud Ribbon, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Or like on barbed wire. So that was the only one that we saw.
Yeah.
And so that also, you know, begs the question, do we just have a big deterrent sitting out there, or do we have active combat, which would be fun to collar some critters and watch and see how that happens.
That's what we've talked about. You know, we see them in the daytime, and a lot of the predator pressure is happening at night. So it would be really interesting if we had some activity sensor, a collar or something, so we could see their activity at night, which is probably when, things are happening. And we don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to say how much pressure we're getting, what work they're doing.
Yeah.
Because we probably don't see it.
And we're in those donkeys quite a bit. So, you know, if they had issues, bites, or something that's not necessarily flesh hanging off, I think we'd know. So it's just very interesting, you know.
I think if something is in the area and they smell it and see it, they're braying, you know, their heads up, trotting around, making a lot of noise. I think it's that presence which is the deterrent. Probably it escalates with them chasing it. But I don't know like how much fighting they get into. I think that's an area we'd like to know more.
I think they're capable of it. Rose, from the get-go, one of the things we saw out of her, we don't have avian predators here. I've never seen any, so I'm going to say they're not here. But we do have big old ravens that sometimes will fly over the meadows or try to go eat seeds out of the meadows. And Rose absolutely wasn't having that. Like, she was jumping 4 foot up in the air, trying to get them out of the air to bite at them and stuff. So I actually think they would work on avian too if they were actually giving them pressure. That just happened to be a perfect scenario where there was ravens there and we caught her trying to go after them. But I think, because I know quite a few producers in the state have eagle problems, that type of stuff. So it could be an alternative for them.
And I think there's questions about, you know, if you have larger carnivores like bears and wolves, how effective they would or wouldn't be. And I don't think that's as well known. I do know a producer in Western Hot Springs County that's got a donkey there where there would certainly be wolf and grizzly bear and black bear pressure. So, but yeah, a lot of unknowns about those larger carnivores too. Yeah, and the bigger raptors. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I totally agree. And if there was somehow that we were able to put like a GoPro camera on them that would be able to see at night, I think that'd probably answer some of those questions. But
Damage that way.
Yeah.
another question we got was maybe more on in terms of the mineral supplementation program of, are there any minerals or mineral packages that we should be concerned about if the donkeys are also out there? Or I guess what's the university?
So we are not, whatever the sheep get fed is what the donkey gets fed. Whatever mineral the sheep get is what the donkey gets. And we're using a Durafirm mineral package right now. And I don't know, I guess I've never seen them in the mineral box to know if they're actually eating it. But they have the same water source, whatever we feed on pasture. So that's where Derek's comment about obesity comes in. We're feeding a distiller's cake at 1 pound per head per day with an extra 3 pounds because the donkey consumption.
Yeah.
And then feeding hay on top of that at anywhere between 5 to 7 pounds per head per day. And again, the donkey's just eating whatever they eat. So we do in the winter, they're well fed for dang sure.
For my body condition score, none of them are even borderline.
Yeah.
I've honestly been kind of surprised.
Yeah.
Really. And even those on really good meadows grazing, like how they're not, I don't know. I don't know why they're doing so well.
And to think that they came out of the hot desert, right? And I mean, Laramie's certainly not, I mean, it's probably the opposite end.
Yeah.
Right? It's cold.
So per that
years.
question, nothing special on the donkeys that we've been doing. So
it looks like we had a question looking at maybe some of like the predation that you guys see mainly at LREC. There's more significant danger from the domestic dogs from within city limits, or do you mainly tend to see like coyote kills?
the majority is coyotes for sure. We've had wild dogs. We probably have once a summer an incident of a domestic dog coming in and raising heck. But you can definitely always tell if it's domestic or coyote. Domestic will just run them till they die of exhaustion or have little scratches or little bites on them. They don't tear into them like a coyote does. But like I said, maybe once a summer do we see domestic dog activity, but the majority is always coyotes.
But I think, yeah, it's always a possibility because we do share property boundaries with town, with neighborhoods. And we surveyed producers in the state a number of years ago, and stray dogs were a significant predation source in every county of the state. Our proximity to town, it's always going to make it. Just someone new moving in with some new, dog named Sugar that would never hurt, a fly, so I think just awareness of that in my mind.
Yeah. All right. I had a question. Kalli, you alluded to that one night where the sheep were on the river pasture and you saw significant predator activity that night.
Mm-hmm.
And suggesting that the donkey might have maybe stuck with one group of sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a optimal ratio between like one donkey per however many sheep that you guys try to stay close to, or what would your recommendation to a producer be?
As far as the ratio, I don't know. I couldn't tell you that definitively to not exceed a certain number. Like the record showed there, what Derek showed you in the graphs. I mean, we've had 150 to 50 head. I think a lot of it is the pasture size and what pressure you have, not necessarily how many sheep you have, because that donkey's going to protect as long as the group stays together. So in that case, 150 ewes, yeah, they probably were getting chased. That donkey was probably trying to keep the sheep away from them. But for 150 head to get split into 3 groups, we also had one lone sheep, which is what attracted us to see what was going on. Is we had one ewe down there just running a fence line by herself, and you could tell she was just crazy. She wouldn't let us get close. We couldn't tell if she was hurt or injured or anything like that. So you knew something happened. So I literally think just all chaos broke out that night. And the donkey did the best she could by trying to get the sheep away. But when they split off, she couldn't stay with all the groups once they split. They'll also split like herding. If that donkey starts to get running and she goes in, like we were saying, they'll blow up the group. When my herd dogs went out there the first time, she like went to split the group up. She meant to do that, to try to get my dogs away from the sheep, so that they weren't all together. So I think that's another tactic of donkeys, is to try to maybe split up the sheep so that they only go for one group. It happened that, you know, that might have didn't work that night, because we had one kill that night and it was a neck kill. So you knew that they had them on the run and went for the neck to get the kill. So yeah, I don't know an
It's a good
answer
question.
for that.
I was thinking about it because in the literature, there's only a few papers that say much about donkeys, like operationally. I want to say there's a recommendation. It's like not bigger than a section pasture, is ideal. Well, you could have, a section that's full of brush and ravines and super nasty, and it's going to be even much more difficult. So the topography matters. I want to say the ratios, like the recommendations are 200 to 500 to not exceed. But even then, I'm not sure that's really been tested. And I think to Kalli's point, how tightly they flock up is really the key thing. I'd say more than 200, it's going to start to get pretty busy.
Think about the actual dimension to
Yeah.
get around and time speed continuum of a donkey.
Yeah.
You're going to run out.
What's the biggest group at any one time we've had? Would you say 150?
Yeah, 150 to 200. Yeah.
Perfect. We had a kind of a question along those similar lines, and producer asking about larger pastures. I know some of this was addressed, but I want to make sure we get this question answered. For larger pastures around from 3,000 to 7,000 acres, and with 1,000 to 2,000 head of sheep, how many burros would be needed? But I know you guys had mentioned some hesitancy about putting multiple burros together.
So that was the recommendation we got from the beginning, was to not put them together so that they would bond to the sheep. Now that they're bonded, that would be a cool experiment for us to do, to see if they would stay and not buddy up and go away from the sheep. That would be something we'd have to do in more years to see if that worked. I don't know. This is working for us, but keep in mind, we're small pastures, we're small farm flock. We're not range, so I don't want to speak to range 1,000 acres, 1,000 head of sheep type deal and say, yeah, this is the thing for you to do. I would be very curious if you did try to do it and you had an operation like that, how it works.
I mean, I think you'd have to have a bonding retrain
Yeah,
where you bring them all in together for however
Yeah.
long, but then one single water source
Yeah.
and try to limit
Yeah.
the factors of deterrence from being a group and a unit.
right.
Yeah, I agree with Kalli and Elias. I think if they were strongly bonded, you could start to approach those bigger, more complex scenarios. Starting with a naive donkey going into that, I think would be set up for failure. So, but I think if you could set them up, they're integrated. They've been that way for several months. They've been through some seasons, maybe had a little predator pressure on a Tuesday night that they figured some things out. It'd really be worth trying, but there's not much in the literature, and we're just on the edge of that, right? Biggest pasture is less than 1,000 acres. So,
Well, thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. But before I ask that, I just want to let everyone know who's still watching is I put in the chat the paper that was referenced, that Dr. Scasta and believe everyone on the panel tonight was helped part of that, along with some contact information and some other references if you guys find you might need to use those in the future. So that was in the chat. And the last question we have, is there like a useful life with donkeys, or how long do we expect that those donkeys might be in production?
This is called ballpark because obviously nutrition, this is silly, but I'm going to try my best. I think you can expect every bit of like 12 to 15 years of working time. I think anything after that isn't a miracle necessarily. I just think you have to have the right situation. Like I do know that their life expectancy is and can be into their 20s, no problem. So the amount of range they're working off of, like I don't foresee our donkeys, not being with us for another 15 years past now. So I think we're going to get a lot of time out of this. There's just not a whole lot that's going to break down on one in our situation with our intervention.
But I think that speaks to any species too. It depends on your topography, what your feed regimen is. Are they just, going on a range and not getting supplemented? I mean, our donkeys have it really well.
Well, you have colic and you have some other equine situations that can just. So I mean, I would say buying one, investing in one, knowing 10 years. Let's just call it 10.
Yeah. So I agree, and I would say that's probably gonna be longer than a dog. Probably by a factor of 2 potentially. So yeah,
there's a lot to be said
there's
for
people dragging calves on 20-year-old horses, right? So certainly in the horse comparison, it's a long-term commitment, I think.
Well, thank you guys again. Even though I've kind of been, watching this from afar, I learned a lot tonight, just through our really successful discussion. And thank you guys for taking time out of your evening to share your expertise with us. For everyone who's still on the call, you will be directed to take a little bit or to take an evaluation at the end of this call. So please do that. It helps us learn where we can maybe improve these in the future to make sure that they're good for you guys. Reminder that next week we will be discussing livestock guardian dogs with Cat Urbicite at 6 p.m. using the same link that you were sent for this webinar tonight. With that, just thank you all for joining us tonight, and remember to eat lamb, wear wool, and go Pokes. So thank you all.